Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Rising Laterally podcast. This is Arjun Sachdev.
And this is Jay Ballou. We hope you find something here that offers you new meaning or a fresh perspective.
If you do, we encourage you to give it life.
Be bold.
Experiment.
And most importantly, bring it into the interactions with the people you surround yourself with.
And see what happens.
Ravens, crows, chimpanzees, elephants, gorillas, dolphins, pigs, octopuses, parrots, dogs, and raccoons. What do all of these animals have in common? They're thought to be some of the smartest animals on the planet. And I think what surprised me the most when I first encountered this list is that they're all over the board in size, in shape, in natural habitat. Intelligence apparently comes in so many different packages, whether it's a 3,000-pound elephant stomping through the bush in Africa, or a raccoon the size of a little house cat rummaging through a trash can in modern suburbia, or a 30-foot giant Pacific octopus out in the ocean with no spine, looking like something from another planet entirely. All these creatures have such different forms of intelligence, but they're all very smart. And I think one of the other things that it teaches us is that intelligence itself is not one single property. There are so many different ways that intelligence can manifest, whether it's self-awareness, whether it's memory, whether it's tool making or logic. And as exceptional as the human animal is, we have to remember that us humans don't have a monopoly on intelligence. It wasn't until 1859 that Charles Darwin, who we all know, brought the idea of natural selection to the attention of the world in his best-selling book On the Origin of Species. And his discovery was met with a tremendous amount of pushback when it was first released, because up until that point, for most of modern human history, we humans like to think of ourselves as markedly different from animals. There was us, and then there was everything else below us. And we thought of ourselves as having transcended the animal world with a unique capacity for rational thought and sense-making that no other animal had. But as Darwin showed us, and as science is continuing to uncover, the truth of the matter is that we might not actually be as unique as we thought. And we should really ask ourselves, why would we be unique? At the end of the day, we came from the same planet, from the same exact ingredients as all the other animals that we're surrounded by. And evolution took time with them too. Just like with us, it took more than 3 billion years of evolution to get to the dog, to get to the squirrel, to get to the chimp. The eons that it took to carve these creatures into reality is nothing to scoff at. Many of these animals have spines and brains and cardiovascular systems just like we do. Even that little bird chirping outside your bedroom window is a highly, highly evolved creature relative to the early forms of life that we all descended from. In a famous book by American philosopher Thomas Nagel, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, Nagel presents a memorable and I think pretty intuitive definition of consciousness. He says a being is conscious if there is, quote, something that it is like, unquote, to be that creature. If a creature has some subjective point of view out onto the world, and certainly most of the animals in the animal kingdom and really all the animals we encounter on a day-to-day basis meet that definition. They are conscious. There is something that it is like to be a dog. There's something that it is like to be a cat. So with that in mind, that the animals we share this planet with all have their own unique form of intelligence, their own unique form of consciousness, their own unique view out onto the world. Let's get into it.
That was amazing because it's so true. And you know, when you're talking about, it took 3 billion years to just get to the dog and the squirrel. I mean, the thought I had was, you imagine owls. They've been around for millions of years. Think about the wisdom that they're flying with. That is just a part of them, right? So it's so true. Like, these animals and even plants have been carrying wisdom with them for so much longer than we have even been a speck of like a being. So it's
Totally.
like, yes, we are amazing creatures, but the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom is packed with amazing creatures as well. And I think the thing that we might run into is that like we think that we're better than all these other species. And in a way, we think we're better because we can't understand some of their intelligence and we can't sometimes understand how they live. And so that somehow makes us better. But the reality is that, these animals have senses just like we do, and a lot of them have better senses than the ones we do. And a lot of them have senses that we don't even know exist. So it's like, instead of, comparing intelligence between two humans or between two animals, it's like, to your point, let's just consider the intelligence that each animal is bringing to the table. And let's talk about some of the amazing cognitive feats that they've also exhibited, right? So I'll share an example from a recent study that was done on mice.
Mm.
Um, this happened at the Planck Institute of Neurobiology, but the headline is that mice master complex thinking with a remarkable capacity for abstraction. So this can be found online on Science Daily, but the way it was presented is to think of a toddler who is looking at a new picture book. Suddenly it points to an illustration and shouts, "Chair!" The kid made the right call, but that does not seem particularly noteworthy to us as adults. Like, we recognize all kinds of chairs as a chair without any difficulty. But for a
Hmm.
toddler, this is a huge part of the learning process. It must actually associate the chair pictured in the book with the chairs it already knows, even though they may have different shapes and colors. So how does the child do that? The answer is categorization. It's a fundamental element of our thinking. Sandra Reinert, who was the first author of the study that I'm talking about, she explains it like this. She says, every time a child encounters a chair, it stores the experience. Based on similarities between the chairs, the child's brain will abstract the properties and functions of chairs by forming the category, quote unquote, chair. This allows the child to later quickly link new chairs to the category and the knowledge it contains. And the study goes on to show that our brain is categorizing continuously, not only chairs during childhood, but any information at any given age.
Mm.
What advantage does that give us? Well, Peter Goldstein, another author of the study, says, our brain is trying to find a way to simplify and organize our world. Without categorization, we would not be able to interact with our environment as efficiently as we do. In other words, we would have to learn for every new chair we encounter that we can sit on it. Categorizing sensory input is therefore essential for us, but the underlying processes in the brain are actually unknown. So now they go to mice because they wanted to study how the brain stores abstract information, but it's really hard to investigate that on humans. So to show this, they had mice presented with different pictures of stripe patterns, and they were given a sorting rule. One animal group had to sort the pictures into two categories based on the thickness of the stripes, the other group based on their orientation. The mice were able to learn the respective rule and reliably sorted the patterns into the correct category. After the initial training phase, they even assigned patterns of stripes they had not seen before into the correct categories, just like that child did in the new book when he saw a chair. Not only that, when the researchers switched the sorting rules, the mice ignored what they had learned before and resorted the pictures according to the new rule, something that we humans do all the time when we're taking in new things and we're learning new things. Therefore, the study showed for the first time to what extent and with precision that mice categorize, and they can actually approach our level of abstraction capacity. And so with this insight, the researchers were able to investigate the basis of categorization in the mouse brain. They focused on the prefrontal cortex, a brain region involved in complex thinking. The investigations revealed that certain neurons in this area become active when the animals sort the stripe patterns into categories. Interestingly, different groups of neurons reacted selectively to individual categories. So another author of the study explains that the discovery of category selective neurons in the mouse brain was a key point. It allowed us for the first time to observe the activity of such neurons from the beginning to the end of category learning. This showed that the neurons don't acquire their selectivity immediately, but only gradually develop it during the learning process. The scientists argue that the category selective neurons in prefrontal cortex only play a role once the acquired knowledge has been shifted from short-term to long-term memory. There, the cells store the categories as part of semantic memory, the collection of all factual knowledge. In this context, we should keep in mind that the categories we learn are the brain's way to make our world simpler. However, that also means that those categories are not necessarily quote unquote right or correctly reflect reality. By investigating category learning in the mouse, the study adds important details around neuronal basis of abstract thinking and reminds us that complex thoughts are not only reserved for humans. It also goes to show that if we're all basically given a group of neurons, and through our lifetime and through what we learn, we continuously shape them.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot there. I think the idea of intelligence, one of like the grounding principles of intelligence being categorization is really powerful. And I think that's essentially what machine learning algorithms are doing, like teaching a machine learning algo to learn what a chair is. It goes through the same process. You have to show it a bunch of different chairs of different colors, of different varieties. They look like different, slightly different variations of a chair, but the machine learning algorithm has to pick up that they all have the same shared function. And I think the fact that that level of information processing exists on a continuum, like we can do it and computers can do it on one hand of the continuum, and then mice can do it as well, maybe to a lesser extent than we can, and to much lesser extent than computers can. But it's all there for all of us, and like that fundamental intelligence and the way that it manifests in our brains is all there. Like the fact that the central processor of a mouse is homologous to ours, like they have a thing, like a little
Yeah.
hamburger in their head that controls their body and processes information just like we do. The brain is such an incredible feature of the universe, and we share that with almost every mammal out there. I assume every mammal out there, and most every creature out there. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and categorization is everywhere. And I know you mentioned it in like machine learning context, but do when you go on and try to enter a password and it says like, hey, select the images that look like bridges, you're actually helping with the machine learning process. The reason that you're asked to do that is obviously to prove that you're a human, but also it's helping the machines learn what bridges look like or what fire hydrants look like.
Very interesting. Yeah, and a little bit adjacent to the concept of categorization, but in line with that theme of abstract thinking. One study that I found really interesting had to do with crows. And crows, I think, like mice, are another animal that we look at them and we don't think that there's a lot going on upstairs. They have small brains. We think small minds, and it turns out that, as I mentioned earlier, crows are actually one of the smartest animals out there. And in one study, it appears that crows are actually better at abstract thinking than humans under the age of 8 years old. Researchers essentially gave crows and gave 8-year-old humans the same puzzle. It was a toy floating at the top of water inside a tall glass. So the glass was too narrow for a bird to get its beak down in to grab the toy, and it was too narrow for the children to place their hands down into the glass and get the toy. And children younger than the age of 8 years old were completely stumped when they were facing this problem. They had no idea what to do, couldn't figure out how to get the toy, eventually gave up. But the crows actually weren't confused at all. What they did was they started picking up pebbles with their beaks and dropping pebbles into the narrow glass, and the stones were able to displace enough water that the toy was able to rise to the surface, and crows were able to snatch it. So I think that's just an amazing example of how animals can actually compete with us, or compete with us at some age level in terms of measures of intelligence. And they're also very clever in their natural environment. Crows use tools. For a long time, we thought humans were the only ones to use tools. We thought that was what separated us from the rest of the animal kingdom, or one of the things that separated us from the rest of the animal kingdom. But they too use tools to form probes and hooks out of sticks and like leaf stems. They'll go into the bark of palm trees looking for bugs. And I think that's another example of how the difference between humans and animals isn't as stark as we think. And one last thing I'll point out with crows that I thought was really interesting is that a big part of their intelligence scientists believe is attributed to the fact that they stay in the nest for a really long time. So they have time for their cognitive abilities to develop. And just like humans, we stay in the proverbial nest until we're 18 years old. That's a big reason why we're as smart as we are, because we have so much time to develop. Even going back to when we're prenatal in our mother's bodies, like we take 9 months to develop. All of that time that goes into architecting our brains, and architecting our cognitive development, that feeds our intelligence. So there's, again, a symmetry here between the crows spending a lot of time in the nest growing up and us spending a lot of time learning in those formative years of our life, which I thought was pretty fascinating.
I've always thought about that because it's like these animals, yes, they are spending some time in the nest. Um, but it's like that description of the crows reminds me that, again, they come with intelligence that just goes far beyond our intelligence. And then there's animals that are born and they're just ready to operate in the wild, like a shark. A shark is just out there in the water, is going to give birth to another shark in the water. And that shark's going to know immediately basically how to swim. It may rely on its mom for some protection or like learning how to hunt. But the reality is that that shark really knows what it's doing the moment it comes out, because there's not much new stuff for the shark to actually have to learn, right? But a
Mm,
human is put
yeah.
into a situation, or even these birds are put into situations where they have to learn, like, okay, there's, now animals and humans are living with each other, in closer quarters. So they may have to learn, like, okay, that's what a human looks like. And now I have to figure out if this human is going to be a dangerous human. Is it a neutral human? Is it um a rewarding human? Is it one of those humans that's going to like leave crumbs behind for me? Like imagine that bird or mouse has to be like considering what it looks out on the world at. And I'm just wondering if an animal has to take in more information, maybe that's why it's in the nest longer. I could be so wrong on that, but that was just me thinking about what you said.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And it's interesting too in like the context of octopuses, because we talked about octopuses before. They're one of the smartest creatures, probably next to dolphins, the smartest creature in the ocean. And in the Rising Weekly a couple weeks ago, we talk about how octopuses have a bunch of eggs. Mother octopuses have a bunch of eggs, and they spread them out into the ocean, and they spend a lot of time incubating them. But once it's time for them to hatch, the mother octopus actually dies, so she doesn't really get to spend any time rearing her young. And there's so many of them. How could she? But octopuses, despite the fact that they don't have that level of care in their formative years, they still are very smart. So it's interesting that there's a lot of elements here. I think maybe some animals are born with more developed instincts right out of the womb or right out of the egg than others. Other animals, have a tremendous capacity for intelligence, but it needs to be taught to them, like humans. We don't come out knowing language. We have to be taught. We have to be taught. We have to be basically taught everything. But the octopus is an interesting one because despite the fact that it sort of raises itself, it's still a very functionally intelligent creature in the ocean.
The octopus is one of my favorite creatures. Let's just linger on them for a moment. So I was listening to Professor Frank Grasso, who's a neuroscientist who studies octopuses, by the way, which is plural for octopus. It's
Hmm.
not octopi,
Octopi.
octopi. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
octopuses. Anyway, so obviously, like structurally, so different than us, but they clearly interact with the world in a very similar way that we do. And what I found fascinating about the octopus, uh, among many things, was how its brain is structured and the fact that it does have a central brain and then also has a distributed brain that is in its suckers and it's in its tentacles. So think about the fact that you can have as many neurons in your central brain and an equal amount of neurons in each of those distributed brains as well. I think that's super fascinating. That's why you can
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's why you can give an octopus like a new item, like a new jar, and there's videos of how it can figure out to open it. They can use tools. Um, there's actually videos out there of, so this is how you know that there's intelligence. Okay, so there are videos out there of an octopus who saw two halves of a coconut husk, so two broken parts of a coconut, and it's carrying both of these pieces around the bottom of the ocean floor, like carrying it with two hands and then walking around with the rest of its tentacles. And then you see this octopus place these two husks next to each other, go inside the middle, and then use its tentacles to cover itself up. Like it just created a cocoon for itself. That
Unreal.
octopus did not see that from another octopus. That octopus was looking out on the world, noticed these two different things, and basically was like, oh, I can combine these and let me see if it protects me.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I gotta
What are
watch
we
that
even
video.
talking about right now?
I know, and they look. So, I think that that's actually like a shortcoming of the human mind. We look at an octopus; it looks so different than us. It looks so alien that we assume it can't be anything like us. But again, it's like just consciousness, it's intelligence in another wrapper. And I have another couple of studies here on octopuses that are interesting as well. One study suggests that octopuses actually have distinct personalities. So they, you take two octopuses, they'll react to food, to threats, opportunities, and threats, if you will, in different but consistent ways. So if there's like a new entrant into their environment, one octopus might be consistently curious and adventurous and want to like figure out what it is, whereas another octopus may be fearful or shy and reserved, and they behave these ways consistently. So it's indicative of like a big five personality, if you will. And another study found that octopuses can identify personalities in other people, other humans. So they did a study where two individuals interacted with one octopus, and one these are humans. One acted extremely friendly, and the other was cold and standoffish. And after a short while, when the two people would enter their living area, like that they would first have this initial interaction, then they would leave, and they'd come back to their living area, and the octopus would ignore the impersonal one. They would ignore like the asshole person and want to hang out with the friendly person, the person that was friendly before. So they can pick up those emotional nuances. It's crazy. In going back to Nagel too, you talked about like the distributed neurons. I just think it's so fascinating to think about what it must be like to be an octopus, to have, you know, whatever it is, 2/3 of your neurons in your arms. They're conscious, they're there, they have a subjective view out on the world, but it must be so different than ours. And it's probably just as vivid, it's just as real, it's just as there, but it's so different. It's really a fun thing to think about.
Yeah, so let's think about it, because while we're having this conversation, there are plenty of octopus that are out there in the wild right now, just swimming around. And if you do actually try to put yourself in their existence, you have to think about something kind of wild, which is, so we all know about their camouflage feature. We all know how, like, within milliseconds, these animals can change color, they can reshape their skin, which is to me the one of the wildest parts of an octopus. But it, to your point of thinking about it from their perspective, they have to be able to understand what they would look like to a predator for them to be able to blend in to that thing that they're trying to blend into to avoid being killed. So
Mm.
think about that. In the moment, they're able to take whatever is going on around them and pretend to know what it would look like if a predator was looking at them so they don't get caught. I mean, to me, again, that's just brilliance. That's intelligence.
Yeah. While being
It's
colorblind, right?
innovative. And
Yeah.
then while being colorblind, that's the other thing. It's like they're colorblind animals. They have no visual pigments in their eye that matches color, but they can apparently see polarized light. So it's like their brain can see polarized light coming in through all the water. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but again, that is from listening to Professor Frank Grasso talk about octopus. And again, to think about their existence, which is as real as ours, but the fact that they can do all of these things makes them very unique relative to us.
Absolutely. You talked about categorization before. I think the fact that we have hands and opposable thumbs and we live on land where like reality is much more, I think, easily manipulated and built on. We're like all in the kind of like Minecraft simulation up here relative to octopuses where they just don't have, they're not working with the same materials that we have, and they're not working with the same tools by virtue of not having hands that can manipulate their world the same we can up on land. And like, I wonder what it's like to be that intelligent but to not be so burdened with excess categories like humans are. We built so many categories for ourselves, so many different objects. I mean, everything is in some sense a category: words, numbers, objects. You look at just taking a 2020 census, we split our identity into all kinds of different categories. And I think octopuses are just as they're just as present, have their own kind of intelligence, as do a lot of other animals, dolphins, elephants, what have you. But they haven't sort of created a hyper categorized world like humans have. And I wonder if they actually have, we think we're at like the top of the food chain. Like I wouldn't want to be anything other than a human, but maybe having that intelligence without also having this suffering that comes with hypercategorization, maybe their existence is actually the most desirable one.
Exactly. I mean, I think categorization is kind of killing us because, to your point, there's so many categories. Everything is just getting sliced thinner and thinner.
Hmm.
And when that happens in our world as humans, it makes it so much harder to actually operate in the world because now there's so many categories that you have to constantly consider. Like one of the gifts of humans is our ability to understand different perspectives, and then even our perspective relative to present, time, future, and past. I think like we can really have a 360-degree view of many, many things, which is a gift, but it's also a curse because in that sense, having all that perspective in a world where everything is so categorized, it actually gets you caught up in a system where there's like all this pressure on you. And, earlier you mentioned the octopus that can kind of feel the emotion of a cold shoulder
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
feel the emotion of a handshake, basically. It's like these animals have learned or know how to, experience the emotions, but not get caught up in them.
Mm.
Right? Like humans, we experience emotions as well, but we categorize our emotions. And again, we just continuously categorize everything about our lives. And as a result of that, it's just this constant circle of thoughts and thinking and words. And
Yeah.
there's no freedom from your own mind so many times. It's because of categorization.
Yeah, absolutely, man. No, that brings a lot to mind. I mean, I think like one of the main objectives of a meditation practice and what like the Zen masters are so good at is just reducing their experience to just the perceptual input, like just becoming aware of your body, becoming aware of your surroundings, becoming aware of the moment, and not allowing thoughts to overtake your experience. Like we identify with thoughts, I think thoughts are so pervasive that we think of them as the bedrock of experience, but they're really not. They're just content within our experience, and they don't need to be there for you to be on. Like you don't need to be thinking for you to have a subjective view out of the world. And I think even looking at a dog, dude, like just the way a dog can sit on a couch for hours like pleasantly without any stimulation, like they are able to be in the moment with, I don't think, this onslaught of thoughts that are constantly beleaguering them and sending them back to the past or pitting them against the future. Like we, to your point about like the human's ability to look backwards and forwards, we get so lost in our imagination, and our imagination, rumination, worry comes to life in the form of words and comes to life in the form of thoughts. And Obviously, those things have led us to do great things, but you have to think about for the average person, if you could learn how to shut your thoughts off, maybe that and actually take yourself back to a sort of more animal like existence, maybe that would be the greatest superpower you could ask for on the planet.
And it goes back to just our ability to shape our neurons and really shape our reality and change our lives. We have that as a human. Like we can think about these things, which is incredible. We can think about what will make our future better, which is also awesome. Like imagine, I was running today, and as I was running, I was thinking, what other animal out there knows that if they run or eat right, they're going to be able to hopefully extend their life on this planet? The ability to plan ahead, the ability to actually then take the steps that are required to fulfill that plan that you imagined in the future. It's just remarkable about how we can actually deal with all those perspectives. But speaking of perspective, I think, part of this conversation is like understanding that there's an animal perspective as well when they look out on the world and see us. And so, like our interactions with wild animals, you kind of have to think about it like we're all just wild animals. We're all out there. It's just a matter of like humans have built walls around us so we can, not be killed at night. But
Yeah.
when you think about the decisions that animals have to make when they look out on a human, I think it's pretty remarkable. And it's kind of like unknown whether wild animals have evolved specific responses to humans, but there are some studies that are out there. There are studies that highlight the trade-off many wild animals face between feeding and avoiding being killed by humans, and the importance of like making that correct decision. Like they have to know where they're going to go eat their grass, because is that patch of field where if they're out there, they're just going to get poached? Or is that patch of field something where if they're out there, they can actually feed?
Mm.
And so there's actually studies that were found on, through the feces of deer
Mm.
that contained higher stress hormone concentrations in areas where the main predators are humans rather than large carnivores, indicating that these species perceive humans to be not only be different from other animals, but potentially more dangerous than other animals.
Wow. Wow. That's fascinating, dude. Yeah, that's really fascinating. You definitely got to wonder how they see us, especially when we're hunting them. It's funny you bring that topic up because I encountered a study too on elephants that was in that similar vein. So the study actually found that elephants can understand, I think it's both a testament to elephants' intelligence and also the way they unfortunately perceive some humans as a threat. They found that elephants can understand the difference between languages and whether a man, a woman, or a child is speaking. So in Africa, only certain tribes hunt down elephants. And in this study, scientists played recordings of two different tribes, one that hunts elephants and one that doesn't. And when the elephants heard the recordings of the elephant hunting group, they became fearful. They moved away from the recording. But when they heard the language of a group that doesn't hunt them down, they didn't move or change their disposition at all. They just had a totally neutral reaction. So then researchers played recordings of the language that scared them, but included women, children, and men. So sometimes the women were speaking, sometimes the children were speaking, sometimes the men were speaking. And the elephants only became fearful when the voice came from the men because the men do the hunting. So they were that discerning. And I thought that was incredible. Not only do they understand nuances in language, but they can distinguish between genders and ages. They can pick out the language that's a threat to them and the gender and an age, which is adult male, that's a threat to them. So I thought that was an incredible testament to elephant intelligence as well.
Is that the study that was conducted in Kenya with the Kamba people and the Maasai people?
I should know that, but I'm actually not sure. So I don't want to speak out of turn there. But did you encounter something similar?
It sounds exactly like that. And to add to that, in addition to what you said, the other element is that they even tested visual cues. So, based on the types of clothing that the Maasai people wear or the Kamba people wear, it doesn't matter about their tribe names because I could be wrong about that too. But let's
Mm-hmm.
just say the group that kills elephants versus a group that doesn't, whichever one they are, elephants, based on their understanding of what those types of people would typically wear, they were also able to measure the elephant reaction based on that.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Yeah, it makes you think I mean, I think a lot of us already have the intuition that elephants are smart and they have, incredible memories and empathy, and they care for each other and for their young, and poaching is not a particularly ethical thing. But I think after, again, the more you start to consider their like subjective view out, like the fear they have when they see that human, when they hear our voices, when they see the clothes we're wearing, I think hunting them down just seems more and more like a terrible thing to do. And not only do humans hurt animals or bring them suffering in the context of the wild, we're obviously creating suffering for animals en masse with factory farming. I wanted to talk about pigs actually.
Before we go there, just because what you just described about the elephants, it goes back to categorization. Like they are categorizing
Mm,
us. So there are elements of categorization. We talked about it with the mice example. We just showed it through the elephants. But to your
true,
point,
true.
it's like humans are taking categorization to like a steroid like level where it's kind of becoming a detriment to society to have so many categories. Like it's okay if you can like distinguish between good and bad or maybe a couple other variants, but to have everything thinly sliced, it may not really be the best thing, even though it might be more inclusive. I don't know. I'm just saying, clearly animals are categorizing, but they're not categorizing to the extent that's causing suffering.
Yeah, no, absolutely, dude. I think we make categories for things where we don't need them. I was trying to think about like a hypothetical example of this, but I think all it takes is there being the first person to create a binary so they can kind of become like the authority on this new category. And then if it's perceived as a salient enough category, everyone else has to adopt it. So like let's say someone says there's like a clear difference in mental health or a clear difference in purchasing behavior between millennials born before 1989 and millennials born after 1989. Someone makes a case for that. So before, people were just thinking in terms of like millennial versus Gen Z, but now someone could come out of the woodwork and create this pre-post 1989 millennial binary. And that's like just a hypothetical example, but they could do that to become like a self-professed authority on this new category that they've created. Like we've been working in finance, we saw it with, beta versus smart beta, like the creation of this new category. And smart beta has 100 different factors, and it's like sometimes people overcreate categories to put themselves in a position, I think, of authority when there really don't need to be that many categories to begin with. And I think as a lot of people are trying to rise to prominence and try to, again, put themselves forward as an expert or an authority, as you said, the categories just keep getting thinner and thinner and thinner and more niche and more niche. And as long as someone can convince everyone that this category is worth entering the lexicon, then we're like bound to it for the rest of time.
Yeah, it's like you have to monitor all new categories all the time to stay up to speed
Yeah,
with
yeah,
society. And that's
yeah.
just not, I don't think we're designed to take in all this information, obviously. And I'm not the only one. I'm sure other people think the same thing. Like, we're not designed to take in all this information. What we have to do is try to figure out how to take in the information and evolve from there. But I know you were going to talk about pigs. I didn't want to take you off the tangent, but I wanted to close or at least bring back the conversation to like categorization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And one final thought I will say there before transitioning to pigs is like, as we do become more hyper categorized and as we start to feel more and more out of our element and more overwhelmed, I think we are setting ourselves up to live in a world where computers are the only ones that can actually handle these categories at scale. So, like, the thinner and thinner we slice it, we're creating a world more and more conducive to AI or computer intelligence. So it's an interesting corner that we're backing ourselves into.
Well, just like mammals and octopus split 505 million years ago, like that's their common ancestor 505 million years ago. Just imagine 500 million years from now. Like we may be at the beginning of this split between the humans who are able to take in all this new categorization and actually handle it and like, handle all that bandwidth versus it being a combination of human and technology that's going to take you to that next level where you can handle in like all this new information. So it's like if you actually think about where we might be on the line of evolution, we may be right there where we've created these machines, they're learning, and they might be messing with us right now by throwing out all these categories at us to see which human is going to actually survive this onslaught of categories and if they can keep their bandwidth up. Because if they can, they'll be able to advance along with the machines. Or if they're the type of human that then gets their Neuralink, installed in their brain to be able to keep up with the bandwidth, that's what's going to survive. So maybe that's an interesting way to think about the human evolution and the fork in that line that we may be at. Again, this is all speculation. This is just me talking about this given the conversation that we had today. But it's like, imagine, just train yourself to be able to take in all of the data because that might be what is necessary to keep advancing because the
Yeah.
machines can clearly handle a lot more than we can. So it's like, how do you train your brain to handle all the things that are coming at you?
We both listened to that Lex Friedman podcast with Charles Hoskinson, who was co-founder of Ethereum, founder of Cardano, big thought leader, and big mover and shaker in the cryptocurrency space. And you listen to him talk about technology, and he is very on point when it comes to categorization and putting everything in their buckets. And as you said, I think that's the kind of mind that will be able to co-evolve and move forward with computer intelligence. But like he is one in a million, and the average
Exactly.
person, like you're not going to be able to get along with just charisma anymore or EQ. I mean, he's a great speaker. I think I was really impressed with him for reasons beyond his own technological knowledge, but at bedrock, he is an incredible mind when it comes to putting things in buckets and concisely communicating these different categories. And those are the people that are going to make it. And it's not, it's not the average mind. That's for sure.
Well, it goes back to showing like, okay, IQ is one thing, EQ is one thing. It's progressed us to this point. But now you really, I think, have to think as a human about how adaptable you are. Like, think about it from a species perspective. Think about it from like a survival perspective. Like, to your point, yes, charisma could take you to a certain, point. Being smart can take you to a certain point. But if you can't adapt with what's going on, then you're just going to be left behind. So that adaptability quotient is now like this third piece of the pie that you have to consider as you train yourself to be a human that could survive in the future.
Yeah. And I'll try to find a segue here back to pigs. I think like maybe one of the positive spins on the position that we're all in as humans is that, or at least some of us privileged humans are in, is that we have the freedom to try to adapt and try to respond to our environment. And that's not a freedom that many animals, at least animals that are being held hostage right now by humans, have in the factory farming industry. And I don't mean to be a hypocrite. Like I'm not fully plant-based at this point. I still eat meat. And after the episode we had last week with Robert Cheek and Matt Fraser, like I'm starting to really kind of reconsider my position from an ethical standpoint. This actually goes all the way back to an episode we did with Benjamin Lohr in 2020. He was the author of Secret Life of Groceries. He had this part of the book where he's writing about joining an animal rights group for like a reconnaissance mission into a swine farm in the early hours of the morning to document the conditions of the animals. And if anyone out there still hasn't read the book, I'd highly recommend it. But one thing he said really stuck with me as he's shining his flashlight over this crowded pen of pigs. They all turn to look at him And then when he's writing about it, he says, quote, pigs have intelligent eyes. There is no other way to put it. And walking through the concrete barn, dust kicking up in the red beam of our headlamps, the light is caught by those tens of thousands of pig eyes, which is a pretty devastating thing to think about, especially in the context that pigs are actually very smart. They're smarter than any other domestic animal. They're actually considered by animal experts to be more trainable than dogs and cats. They like to snuggle, they like belly rubs, just like dogs do. You can find the videos online. They sleep nose to nose with each other, when they have the space. And we call them dirty, but they actually are the only farm animal that makes a sleeping den separate from their latrine area. And they rub themselves in mud, but they just do that to keep cool because they don't have sweat glands. So rubbing themselves in mud is no different than a dog panting. And going on here, their intelligence was actually first discovered in experiments 30 years ago in the 1990s. Pigs were taught several tasks using a cursor on a computer screen, and they learned these tasks as quickly as chimps. They could move the cursor on the screen with their snouts and use the cursor to distinguish between scribbles they knew and those they were seeing for the first time. So again, categorization, pigs have that too. And in another study performed at the University of Illinois, piglets were actually able to complete a maze with 80% accuracy after just 5 days. So even young pigs are very smart as well. And I think going back to Nagel here, there is definitely something that it is like to be a pig. Like they definitely have a window out into reality, and the fact that we're putting them in these conditions, it's pretty horrifying if you think about it from their perspective. Their organ size and their physiology actually resembles humans so closely that one day we may be doing human heart transplants using pig hearts. So we're actually already successful. Scientists are already successfully doing this with baboons. Baboons have received transplanted pig hearts and have actually survived up to 6 months. So that may be coming one day for humans. And it makes me think, like, one day out there, is there going to be some dude with a pig heart beating in his chest who's still eating bacon for breakfast?
That's wild. And yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, I mean, we all know the atrocity of animals, and again, I don't really want to go down that route just because again, I still eat meat, and I don't want to be a hypocrite, but obviously terrible living conditions. I think what we're finding is that you can find an example of all animals showing a really incredible form of intelligence. Um, and so going back to that, let's just talk about how bees uh, have been able to identify faces. So, like honeybees are known for being able to identify a particular flower. So there were scientists that at Cambridge that were wondering, well, can they take that talent to other contexts? So these scientists like pinned 4 photographs of 4 different people on a board, and they started rewarding bees with some sugar, some sucrose solution, if they went to the right target face. And it showed that like the insects, these bees were able to do it even when the reward was taken away. These bees continued to approach the target face accurately up to 90% of the time. And they could pick out the target face even 2 days after being trained. So again, like, yes, the pig example, it's like a sad one, but it's one that shows about how smart they are. And this is just a neat little study that shows like bees are pretty smart as well. They have this cognitive ability. They can at least identify shapes and forms. And it's like, they used people's faces. I'm sure if they used like different objects, they would have been able to identify those different objects. So it's not like they can maybe recognize a human face per se, but it's like they can recognize an object.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, especially given how small they are. That's the first kind of bug we've talked about. To
Think
think
about
about.
their existence and their eyes, and like the perspective from those eyes, which are maybe seeing multiple of you.
Yeah, yeah, and to be in the hive, shoulder to shoulder, body to body with so many other bees. We live such a a lot of us live such a isolated existence relative to like those hive animals. You talked earlier about how we put walls around ourselves that make us feel like we're separate from nature. Like there are animals out there that are truly living a shared existence with their fellow species, and we're pretty far away from that. You got to wonder if part of the neuroticism that we're all experiencing in this day and age is just given how isolated we are. Maybe intelligence and experience is meant to be shared, and I'm sure bees are operating on a lower level than us. They clearly have some intelligence, but it's a different deal than what we have. But maybe there is something to be said for making sure your experiences are shared with others.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's like maybe when you bring neurons together collectively, you know, then you have more efficiency. So that's why swarms are so interesting.
Mm.
I heard Professor Simon Garnier, a biologist, talk about swarms and their quote unquote intelligence. And it's like, think about how, well, have you ever heard of the puppy wheel?
No,
The puppy pinwheel?
no.
Okay, so there's like plenty of videos on this out there where they'll put a bowl of food and then they'll have these puppies like go feed from it. And no matter if there's 5 puppies or 50 puppies, they all go in this automatic pinwheel formation and they start eating around the bowl like super fast. And it's like, you think about that. They have an ability to understand this like self-organization. And if they all just keep pushing on each other and they'll still be able to feed, it's like this synchronized collective approach to feeding out of this bowl. Just look it up, puppy pinwheels. It's pretty fascinating. Um,
Wow.
but also like army ants, how they self-organize and interact with each other. One small ant, you're not going to get a lot out of that one small ant. But you put a million ants together, you get a colony going. Now it's like you have some quote unquote brain power. They're capable of solving problems. They can perceive information from their surroundings. They can transmit that information to other parts of the colony. Like a single ant can't gather all that, process all that, and then like survive. It needs the other million ants around it to be part of that. And it's just interesting to think about swarms and collective intelligence. And, just think about ants again. There's videos out there of how they seemingly create bridges. Maybe the 2 leaves are like really far apart, and really far apart for an ant could just be like an inch,
Yeah.
or like a few inches. But
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, all joking aside, there's a gap between leaves and the colony is moving from one destination to the next. And there's videos that look like the ants are creating bridges. But according to Professor Simon Garnier, it's interesting. It's not that they actually know to create a bridge. It's just that the way they communicate is through touch and pheromones. And so all they need is the signal that says basically, as long as an ant is stepping on me, I don't move. So it's not like it actually knows to create the bridge. It just happens. And it's just interesting to think about that. Like how when you get more neurons in a collective space, how that can increase efficiency, that can increase the division of labor, that can increase the ability to specialize. And so it's not like they're necessarily smarter, they're just more efficient.
Mm, interesting. And I think that goes back to the very beginning of the conversation in the sense that even as an individual organism, as an individual human organism, we're made up of component parts too. Like our brain isn't just one thing, it's a collection of many different neurons. Our brain is housed in a body that's made up of many different organs. Some of these organs evolved at different times. Like we think of ourselves in our mind as one thing, but you can kind of start to break that up too. The difference between instinct, difference between subconscious experiences and conscious experiences. And in some sense, our own human experience, as singular as it feels, is sort of like a collective experience, just like it is for the ants. In some sense, we're an instantiation of collective intelligence as well, just given how many different parts we have.
Agreed. Absolutely. Collective intelligence. And to your point, like put minds together and you get diversity, you gain functionality, you gain flexibility, you can handle more complexity. And it's like, you just got to think about like putting neurons together. But we were spending some time talking about like all the information that's coming to us and how to handle it. Well, this same professor who was talking about swarms, he had an interesting take. He said, we have to evolve to be able to handle all the information that is coming at us all the time. And we have to be able to distinguish whether that's information that's going to be beneficial or not. So, in other words, like you don't see misinformation being spread in an ant colony the way that you do in our society. Like that's likely not happening. So we have to like somehow figure out how to handle all the information, but at the same time make sure that misinformation isn't like being spread.
Mm.
And that could take lifetimes to be able to like evolve to that ability. I don't even know if you can. I don't know if you even can do that, but just to think about our existence and an ant colony existence, you don't see lying spreading through an ant colony the way you do in our society.
Yeah. Yeah. And that intersects with technology as well. I mean, how much of the misinformation that's being disseminated right now is being disseminated over technological devices that weren't here even like 30 years ago. So
10
we
years
have
ago.
10 years ago. Yeah, exactly. Maybe that like on a biological level, on a tribal level, humans are would be able to develop a sort of like allergic reaction to misinformation, and those falsehoods get weeded out over time. But when the falsehoods have the benefit of technology on their side, who knows if our natural allergy to bullshit as humans will be powerful enough to like weed it out of the mainstream. It may not be.
That's what I'm a little fearful of. It's like, how do you actually adapt to that? And the people that are spreading the misinformation, they think that's truth.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just interesting, but it's like, yeah, I mean, to think that we were just packaged with these neurons that we can shape through our lifetime and that have been shaped over years and years of evolution in animal history. Um, and then to think that you can pass on neurons to the next generation. So I'm going to give credit to Professor Susanna Herculano Housel, who is a neuroscientist out of Vanderbilt University. And the way she talked about passing down knowledge, it's like instead of thinking about it like you're passing down knowledge, think about it like you're passing on neurons. First of all, how much more energetic does that sound? For all these people that are like, "Oh, I'm energy. I'm just living." Okay, if you're energy, then don't talk about passing down knowledge. Talk about passing on neurons. And
Mm-hmm.
like we have this ability to pass on neurons to the next generation. That's why education is so important. That's why you have to be able to like have this system that's in place where education and knowledge keeps getting passed down on and on and on. That's one of the things that we're trying to do with the podcast. It's like share information, share the things that we know, share and learn along the way, share and learn alongside each other, and then take that and pass it on. And as we all do that, and if we all play our part, then we collectively thrive. So it's like, think about passing your neurons forward.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we're still trying to get at the source code of like what a thought is or what an idea is, but the idea that there's been this whole resurgence in like stoicism, and those ideas are reconstituting in people's minds that were first constituted in people's minds that originally formed them, 2000 plus years ago. Like it's if we're having the same thought, I would imagine it's arguably like the same configuration of neurons. So even though the brains that those neurons originally configured in are long since decayed and long since gone, the knowledge in the form of the way it manifests incarnate in people that can leap generation to generation to generation. If you have an idea is so much more immortal than a person. Like theoretically an idea can live forever.
Absolutely. Our
Yeah.
episodes are going to live forever and they're all ideas. And I actually think that animals do have ideas. Like, again, going back to that example of the octopus who had an idea to take two coconut husks and put them together.
Yeah, that was an idea. Yeah. Yeah. And if another octopus was around to witness it, they probably picked up that idea too. And who knows
Exactly.
how many years in the future octopuses will be doing something similar just because that first octopus had that original idea. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Even after all those octopuses are long since gone, there could be some octopus way out in the future that's doing the same thing. It's incredible.
And all it took was one.
Yeah, all it took was one. All it took was one. Well, man, I enjoyed the conversation today. I mean, this was one that going into it, I was excited for, and it really forced me to get out of my own viewpoint, trying to put myself in the minds of other animals. And I think it's an incredibly humbling thing when you consider how much intelligent, conscious life is out there. It's actually a sort of freeing thing to really settle into because it makes you realize how many things are going on beyond yourself, how many problems other humans and other creatures are having that probably are much larger than the ones that I might be encountering in this moment. So I enjoyed preparing for it. I enjoyed having the conversation, and I hope who's ever out there listening enjoyed it too.
100%. And just to add to that, I would say it definitely helped clear my mind of like just the awareness around that there are so many categories. I don't necessarily, you don't have to get caught up in all of them. You don't have to get caught up in all the emotions. So it was actually quite meditative to go through the preparation process for this because it did put my own perspective of existence in the context of every other animal, which again, I don't know too many people are really thinking about. Obviously, we all have busy lives and things like that, but that is what's necessary to just have a better appreciation for the existence that we do have. And then I would just offer this up, like get to the point where you can see the perspective of not only being the person who's having a picnic on the lawn with your family, but the perspective of the mouse in the grass that's also waiting for you to leave so it can eat the crumbs of the cheese that you left behind.
Enough said.
And do it at the same time. That's what I'm saying. Like, be that present with the perspective of like, I'm sitting here having a sandwich and cheese and crackers. At the same time, there is a mouse out there that is waiting for me to leave so it can benefit from my existence. So I don't know. Appreciated the conversation. Thought it was great. And see you later, folks.
Thanks, bro. If you enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the Rising Weekly newsletter sent out each week.
Every Friday, we expand on the episode with insights, recommendations, and more.
You can sign up at risinglaterally.com.
Thank you.